Right, Dave, I have no idea how many are coming. Last time, 6 people said they were coming, and we ended up with 15. And I presumed in an evening we might get more. I've had a couple of people say they couldn't come in the end. So I'm not too sure. Generally, people sort of gradually join in as we get going. But as this is a Q&A, then I suppose you could always just, people can just chip in. But can I go first, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
How was your holiday, Dave?
Oh, the holiday, yes. Communing with tortoises and iguanas in the Galapagos Islands. You know, I can best compare it to traveling back in time a million years. You know, those creatures have been there all that time, and you know, they haven't really changed all that much. And they don't really care that you're there, which is, you know, they don't run away, which is what everybody speaks of as one of the most remarkable things. The animals just carry on with their lives and what they're doing, and they let you wander among them and just observe. And it's quite a remarkable place. You have to like wildlife and natural environments to appreciate it, but if you do, it's quite a place.
And did you, out of interest, did you leave your phones and your emails and everything so that you could just completely switch off?
I left my laptop at home, but I did bring my cell phone just in case, and because I use it sometimes as a camera. It has some different features than my regular camera that I occasionally use. So I did check my email once or twice, but mostly switched off.
Yeah, because that's the nice thing about it, isn't it? Just completely switch off and not be needed, just have nothing. I remember the 2 periods of my life where I was able to do that: 3 weeks in New Zealand and 2 weeks when I first moved up from Devon to Yorkshire, and I went lambing with Stuart for a couple of weeks, and no mobile phones at that point. And we were just completely isolated on this little farm in the middle of nowhere. It was bliss, absolute bliss. So I'm looking forward to doing that again at some point. Maybe do that with us at some point. Hello, Lee.
Yeah. Hello. You okay?
Yes, thanks. I think we're all well. So we're just going to open it up to questions so that anybody who feels like they'd like to ask Dave a question, unless Dave, would you like to say anything? I mean, everybody knows who you are, and I think everybody's listening to your talk, but is there anything you'd like to say before we start?
Oh, goodness. You know, I was just on another conference call and with a graduate school that is, you know, teaching this material to people who are going for doctoral degrees in behavioral health. And you know, it's one of the 2 graduate schools that I teach this material in, you know, that's just, you know, one indication that this field is growing and is achieving respectability in academia. And you know, when I look back 10 years ago where we were, I mean, there was none of this going on, and now we have one documentary that's been released, another documentary that may well come out this year, a 3rd documentary that is just beginning, a major research project in Boulder, Colorado, involving the scanning of brains by a guy whose name is internationally known in that field. So this is, you know, PPD is the biggest blind spot in the healthcare system. It falls in between the responsibilities of medicine and mental health, but it's finally getting the attention that it deserves. And I think I only see it accelerating from here. And then, of course, there's our textbook. We have a textbook with something like 15 authors from 5 different countries who have contributed, Georgia among them. And we're looking forward to publishing that this year as well. So,
a fantastic cover for the book as well, isn't it, Dave?
I like it, and it seems like our crew of authors is voting for it as well. So
yeah, this is Dave's choice of cover. He put together the cover, and it has got the most votes, definitely. I must tell the others actually that they haven't won.
Yeah.
No, it's a real. As soon as Zoe and I saw it, we just thought that's the winner. Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems very professional. I think.
Yeah.
I farmed that out to the website that you recommended, and the guy did a good job.
Yeah. No, I think it is going to look really good. Fantastic.
Great.
So has anybody got any questions? I did suggest people bring some questions with them. So anybody want to go first? Don't all shout at once.
I was expecting to be camouflated behind the English-speaking people in just listening, but I'm afraid I'm not going to.
No, come forward, Ankana.
My goodness.
So let me just say today, first of all, Ankana has had my book translated into Spanish. She's heading up SIRPA in Spain, basically, and we are working together to run our first training course in Spain in the next few weeks or months.
I hope it will be in the next month or couple of months. We have to settle the dates as soon as possible.
And I'm learning my Spanish. I am doing on my phone, doing a little bit of Spanish every day, but not enough to run a course. So initially it will be to English-speaking people, but the idea then is that Ankana will then go on and run her own courses. So she's a real go-getter with all this, which is fantastic. And works in Argentina as well, haven't you? You've had the book published in Argentina too. So very proud.
And now I have received a mail about Mexico. They want the book in Mexico, but I don't know how we're going to make it there because it's quite complicated. Anyway, that's not an important subject now, but Spanish-speaking community is waking up about all this. It's very difficult to introduce this, and we have all the psychologists quite like this, like, are you going to get inside of our field? That's the main issue here, how not to get inside of that. And my main question was about that, because most of the people that they have all these PPD and TMS symptoms, they have some of them big traumas behind, and the thing is, for instance, now I have a lady that she's becoming every day better and better as she's going, like writing and all doing all the stuff I'm conducting her to do. But she's asking about, now I feel like telling everybody what happened, and that makes me. I don't have enough information about that. I found that I need some more psychological training in order to. That's something that she should do, because it could be quite dangerous to try to tell everybody what happened to her, because she's been sexually abused when she was 9 years old by her parents, and then she's shocked now when she realized, because she's having a lot of flashbacks when she started, because before she when she started having flashback when she started the therapy, not before. And I'm quite like overwhelmed with all this, like, it's like, oh my goodness, where are we going to arrive to this point? Anyway, I have the psychologist already ready in order to send her, but she's quite reluctant to go, because she's. But the main question is, what about the question that she asked? Is it's okay to say, to go outside and tell the relatives and everybody what happened? Have anyone had some experience about that?
Well, in the long run, the relief from PPD that is linked to childhood abuse is going to come from first recognizing the emotions that are associated with the abuse that you suffered. And it can be any kind of negative emotion. It can be anger, it can be fear, it can be shame, it can be grief, it can be guilt, or it can be some combination of those. And the first struggle for a lot of people is simply to recognize that those emotions are there, because when the abuse was suffered when they were a child, you don't really have too many options as a child for what you can do. So you end up repressing those emotions and just, pushing them into the back of your head somewhere. And you can get, as a child, very skilled at doing that, so that as an adult, when you look back, you don't remember a lot of what happened. You don't certainly don't feel a lot of the emotions that would be associated with what happened to you. Many of my patients will tell me very calmly, monotone voice about the terrible things that happened to them, and it's completely disconnected from any emotions. But the emotions are in there, and they are, since they are not capable of being expressed in words by the patient at that point, they're being expressed via the body, and they are, that's how the symptoms are being created, is by the bodily expression of emotion, the somatic expression of emotion. So in order to relieve someone's symptoms who's in that situation, the first step is to help people become aware of their feelings, just to recognize that those emotions are in there. And there's a couple of ways of helping people do that. One way that crops up occasionally is that patients will tell you stories about how they had an outburst of anger or a sudden episode of overwhelming fear, some kind of burst of emotion that surprised them, that they didn't expect. And usually those can be connected to the abuse that they'd suffered in the past. For example, it was one of my patients, the very common long-term outcome from childhood abuse is having very poor self-esteem. And he told a story about an interaction with a friend who said something that she interpreted as pitying her, that she was having trouble recovering from a sprained ankle. And the friend said, "Oh, gee, I really hope you're going to get better from that. It must be, feel very bad for you to be so weak in your ankle like this." And, she just suddenly became enraged because part of her brain had interpreted this remark to indicate that she was a weak, slowly recovering type of person. And that kind of pushed a button for her of being somehow of a lesser of a person, which is what abuse makes people feel like. Abuse in childhood makes people feel like they don't measure up, like they're second-rate human beings, and they tend to be very insecure about that long into the adult years. So she suffered this tremendous burst of rage at this woman who had really been just trying to say something supportive about her slow recovery from her ankle sprain. And receiving all the anger back must have come as a big shock to this friend. The patient herself had no idea where all this anger came from. But if you understand about abuse and self-esteem, and then you can see, and the fact that people who are abuse survivors who are suffering from PPD have these volcanoes of emotion that are below the surface, and not certainly occupying the entirety of one's personality, but occupying a piece of it. Then you can understand where those anger outbursts come from. So helping the patient to understand, here is why you had that anger outburst at that particular moment in that situation, that helps give people insight. But a more common way to help people recognize their anger or the sources of their negative emotions is to have them imagine their own child or a child that they care about growing up exactly the way they did, suffering all the same abuse that they suffered. Because when the patient looks back at their own life, it's hard to be objective. They don't have another more positive parallel life that they can compare it to, or let's say a more they don't have a happier childhood that they can instantly make comparisons with. But if they imagine their own child going through the same kind of abuse, that can help them recognize more accurately just how difficult the situation was, and all those emotions that they feel or that they would feel about their own child or a child that they care about. They can very readily translate that into, well, if I'm feeling this about my own child, I must be feeling it about myself too. And that can help them connect with some of these emotions that have been buried for however many decades. And that's absolutely essential, because until you connect with those emotions, you can't do anything about them. But once you connect with them, then you're feeling them, and then it's time to put them into words, which brings us all the way back to your original question of, is this okay? And the answer is that, depending on exactly how she does it, yes, it is okay, because it's the way to find relief of your symptoms is to convert the bodily expression of emotion into the verbal expression of emotion. So talking about it, expressing your feelings in words. The only question that I'd have is exactly how she does it. It's one thing to go back and confront the abuser. I don't necessarily recommend that people do that, but a lot of my patients benefit by starting out just by writing it all down. It's a very common therapeutic technique for me to recommend that people write a letter to the ACE perpetrator, the adverse childhood experience perpetrator, or the abuser, to put it in one word. Write a letter to that person and put down all your thoughts and emotions. Not to mail the letter, because that usually doesn't do any good, although a tiny fraction of my patients have actually mailed them. But the main benefit of the exercise is to write it all down. And once people start writing, that act of expressing words, either typing it on a keyboard or writing it with a pen, has a magic ability to pull ideas and emotions out of people's heads that they didn't necessarily know were there. One idea leads to another, one emotion leads to another. And the more they can put into words or down on paper or onto a computer screen, the less there is to go into the body and cause symptoms. And it's really an exercise of converting one form of emotional expression into another, and absolutely results in symptom relief.
Mm-hmm. She has a whole compendium of symptoms. She's got everything: migraines, colon, irritable bowel syndrome, bladder, the urinary bladder.
Urinary bladder, yes.
Yeah, she's got she gets better from one and she goes to another. It's the whole package is unbelievable, and she's around 62, 63 at this moment, and she had no idea what happened since all this came up when we started the treatment.
Yeah, so you're talking about 53 years since she was abused, and it's still having this profound physical impact. The research has shown very clearly that the more symptoms a patient has, the more likely it is that they are connected to PPD, especially if they have 6 or more.
Yeah, she's got at least, and changing in different types of, sometimes 3 or 4 of them at the same time, sometimes going one after the other. That made me suspect that something really heavy had to be there, because it was not I realized that her nervous system was very threatened, very in a lot of fear, even though she was not able to realize what that fear came from. Yeah, but the main issue is my worries about, she wrote the letter, she also did like a ritual of, something related, but she now wants to confront, you know, and that makes me quite afraid, you know, like she could have like from the relatives to say negate, I mean, to say no, that is impossible, and that will make her again go into symptoms.
In there for a moment. First of all, you've suggested she sees a psychotherapist, and therefore it's her choice whether she sees somebody or not. I think in this case, if she's done all the journaling and she's written the unsent letters and she's been able to reach a point of acceptance, then that's good. If she's wanting to contact them to blame them, it's a different matter. And it's also about putting it to her that if she is going to talk to the family and tell the family, she needs to be prepared to deal with whatever comes back from that. And she needs to be really aware of the pros and cons of not saying anything or saying something, and maybe even suggesting that she does have the contact details of the psychotherapist to actually just talk things through with to begin with. But it sounds to me that she's not reached a point of acceptance and forgiveness, and that she's out looking for to blame them, which means
exactly.
I would suggest she's not ready yet.
She's not ready.
Get her to read the book Forgive for Good by Dr. Fred Luskin. That might help her just to, because it's fine to talk about it, isn't it? If you're ready and you feel ready in yourself, but if she's still...
She doesn't read English. She doesn't read English.
Is it not in Spanish, that book?
I'll try to look something similar. Maybe this book translated to Spanish. But yeah, she needs what you said about if she's looking for revenge or blaming is because she's not get to the point of acceptance and letting go and dealing really deep with emotions, yes. Because if not, she will not be so in that need of revenge.
No, right. That would be the wrong reason, I would suggest, wouldn't you think, Dave, to actually...
Yeah, it's hard to know what to recommend without having interviewed her and seeing where she's at. You know, sounds like she's already done a great deal of writing, and yet that she still has more emotion that she wants to express, and that she feels like expressing it directly to the perpetrators is the next step for her, and that may work for her. And other people in the same situation might not be prepared to handle people denying what she's saying. So it would probably be best if she talked over her strategies and plans with a psychotherapist.
Okay, I have taken note of all that. Thank you.
Right. Has anybody else got any other questions? Hello, Sarah and Lee, by the way.
I was just going to ask, you mentioned then, whilst answering Enkana's question about when they've got multiple symptoms, and you said 6 or more. Is that 6 or more over a period of time, things coming and going, or 6 or more all at the same time?
Yeah, 6 or more or less simultaneously. You know, some of them can come and go, but if they've been a more or less, my recollection of that paper, which was a couple of decades ago, is that they were more or less continuously present. Mm-hmm. My personal record patient had 27 different symptoms.
Great.
Wow.
I have more than 20. I was counting them up the other day. Not now, but in the past.
Right, but that's not all at the same time, though, is it? And there's that other thing about the symptom imperative as well.
It's often it is. Somebody will have one and then they'll have another. But if you've got lots, then you really do need to start thinking, okay, what is going on here? But it doesn't mean that somebody who presents with migraines and nothing else, it isn't PPD, for example.
Yeah.
There's lots of different presentations. But yes, the more there are, especially at the same time, the more you sort of start thinking, okay, I guess what's going on there. So, anybody else?
I have a little question. You know when people can get fluid in the stomach?
Fluid?
Or around the stomach area? Is it called is it called ascites?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Is
Yes.
it called ascites when you have fluid in the stomach?
Yes.
Would you consider that a mind-body symptom?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, there are a couple of different reasons why people can get that, but they're not mind-body.
Okay. Yeah. Because the reason what it's actually led me to another question, because a friend of mine's got a child who's got that, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because I thought, what is it, mind body? Is it not? I don't know. But then that kind of got me thinking about, what about children who maybe, I don't know, let's say cancer, for example. Children who get cancer, from a certain model, it could be said that cancer is caused by repressed anger and rage. But then with children, what's your thoughts around children who have terminal illnesses, which in some thoughts are kind of considered mind-body, in some other thoughts not?
Well, there is evidence that the more adversity you suffer in childhood, the more that seems to stimulate the inflammatory system in the body, which in turn contributes to diseases of organs that are not mind-body. So there is a definite link there between various types of psychosocial stress, especially when experienced as a child, and development of organ diseases later on. One example that was presented at Georgie's conference last year was autoimmune diseases, where the body's immune system is attacking the body itself. And it turns out the more adversity you suffered in childhood, the more likely you are to be hospitalized as an adult for one of those conditions, which includes things like lupus and multiple sclerosis. Similarly, the more adversity you suffered as a child, the more likely you are to get things like cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. And it seems like the mechanism of that is, they've controlled for things like smoking and obesity when they do these studies, so it's not that. It seems to be activation of the inflammatory system in the body, which in turn impacts blood vessels and the pancreas. So we are seeing kind of a crossover phenomenon. We're normally in our field, we're used to talking about psychosocial stress causing mind-body symptoms. But it turns out psychosocial stress can also contribute to real live organ diseases.
Can there be genetic stress as well? Because passed on, I've read somewhere that you can, if someone's been stressed, they can pass that stress on to unborn children. I think what Lee was just saying, if you've got a small child, would they have had enough stress within them to generate a cancer, for example, in a young, let's say a 2-year-old, because you do hear of the odd child that's got cancer at a very early age.
I think
would there be an element of genetic stress?
The stress is more of a risk factor. It increases your risk, so it goes along with lots of other things that can cause cancer, and it's just one more factor among many. I don't think we're ever going to be able to point a particular individual and who has a tumor or a heart disease and say, it was your stress that did this. It's just one factor among many. Just like, some people can smoke and drink and live to be 90 years old, and other people, like one of my college roommates, gets lung cancer and dies at age 49. So there's a lot of individual variability going on there, and the stress is just one relatively modest factor amongst many others. It's a lot smaller, for example, than cigarette smoking.
I think the point to make here maybe is to make sure that we are aware what are mind-body disorders and what are other conditions that might well be where stress plays a part. But we have to be very careful as practitioners when we're trying to raise awareness of this in this, that we're not saying this is a panacea for everything. So yes, we can read all the sort of like the epigenetics work and where, yes, with generational trauma. And there is, I'm sure there's a lot in that. And especially if you're thinking of young children that get eczema and asthma and peanut allergies and things, then I'm sure that the epigenetics and the mother, when they're pregnant, and the stress hormones passing through the umbilical cord, that may well play a part. I think we just have to be careful when we're taking on patients or talking to other health professionals around us, that we're not just saying, oh yes, we deal with stress, we can resolve everything. I think we just need to be careful.
Yeah, we're never going to be able to cure somebody's cancer by relieving their stress, but we can absolutely relieve many patients with irritable bowel or low back pain by uncovering the stresses that they're dealing with and addressing those. And that's really our focus, is when we talk about psychophysiologic disorders, we're talking about physical symptoms that we can achieve relief, either partial or complete, by uncovering stress that's linked to those disorders, treating that stress, and we're going to see people improve in response to that. So that's really our focus.
And most because when we relieve the stress and we address the stress, the parasympathetic system takes over, and all the capacity and potential to recover and regenerate cells takes place, isn't it?
Well, yeah, when we're talking about a balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, it's almost certainly the case that in somebody suffering from an active and significant PPD, that their sympathetic nervous system is likely to be more active in general than their parasympathetic nervous system. And with our treatment, we anticipate that we're going to change that balance. It's not easy to measure, how much one of those two systems is active versus the other. But I think in general, knowing what we do about the fight or flight system and the rest and digest system, that the work that we do with clients is going to be shifting toward the parasympathetic, toward the rest and digest.
I think, and very much the breathing, using breathing as well, because there's a lovely book called The Science of Breath that really talks about how you can observe the way somebody's breathing and determine where they are as far as in the parasympathetic or sympathetic, and that by using slow belly breathing you can boost the parasympathetic. So it's a very evidence-based book, but I'm certainly using slow belly breathing and just gentle emotional awareness so much more with clients now, and it can be really, really, really good in the moment as well as learning it and balancing things out. And when you those physios of us, actually, how many are there? 3 of us, who have been on Peter Sullivan's course. So Peter Sullivan is a physio in Australia. He's a New Zealander though. And his research area was in core stability initially, very pro core stability until after
stability?
Core stability.
Core stability.
Core, abdominal strength, the strength.
Oh, okay, core stability. Okay, I get it. Thank you. Oh, okay.
It's just the way I said it. And he, as soon as he realized that all the research, including his own, was not showing it was of any benefit for back pain, he changed what he was looking at. And now he runs courses worldwide, and there's probably half a dozen of us as practitioners who are SIRPA practitioners or physios who have been to his courses. And it's very in line with this as far as dealing with people's fears related to their conditions, and using the same research, disproving all these things about, bending is bad for your back, etc., etc. He doesn't address adverse childhood experiences, doesn't go into stress a huge amount, but he has some excellent results, and it's very much using slow belly breathing as well, because if fight or flight causes muscle tension, what are we doing with core stability exercises, but increasing the strength, the tension in the muscles. But with slow belly breathing, it calms that tension down that's part of the fight or flight response. And therefore, by using that, you can actually, if people's pain is due to tension, you can relieve that pretty quickly. And Sarah, you're an Alexander technique teacher, and you very much know that, wouldn't you? Wait a minute, let me unmute you. Right, go on. Wait a minute, Sarah, I think, you're muted at your end. Oh, there you are, that's it. No, we can't hear you, Sarah. Oh no, and you're not muted either. Okay, she's going to have a look at something.
Take the volume knob at the top of your...
Yeah, it's not the volume. What about headset? Play around and then just test out, say something every now and again, and maybe somebody else could ask for now. Okay, so she's having a problem with her amp and sound system. Oh, what a shame. If you want to mention something, right, she's an Alexander technique teacher. It goes beautifully with this work. But if you want to send a message, Sarah, ask a question of Dave, then text it. Are you enjoying your dinner, Lizzie? Right, any other questions?
I've got one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, hi. I've just had quite a busy day at work, so I'm just eating my dinner. Yeah, I've got a question. It's more of an observation of something I've noticed. So I see a lot of patients, and I have conversations with them quite a lot about emotional symptoms. And I from the moment I see them, I bring the idea in, hopefully, so that other doctors can't, so they kind of understand that there's this emotional element. And I've had a number of patients say to me, well, and I ask them about emotions, and they say, well, I'm angry about the symptom that I've got, but I'm not angry at anything else. Mm-hmm. And I was curious about that, because really, the more stressed people are, the more limited their language is. This is a kind of interest of mine, that they kind of, often the easier we can put things into words and connect that with how we're feeling, the easier it is to process it and kind of move forward. And I suppose my question is that something that other people have noticed? And how do you go about working with somebody who, because I suppose if you suspect that there may well be an emotional element, a PPD element, particularly as the tests haven't found anything. How would you go about kind of unpacking that? If they say, well, I'm angry about the symptom, but the rest of my life is fine.
I get them to look at the SIRPA website.
Okay.
Because because I'm a physio, and I get referred quite a lot of people from the neurosurgeons, one of whom is kind of on board, not sure though, just very, but I see them, I'll assess them, and we'll start off down the hands-on route. But I will, in the first, after the first session, I will say to them, what I want you to do is I want you to go home and I want you to look at this website and think about it. So I introduce it immediately. I've got my poster on the wall, and but I get them to look at it. And the other thing I have started doing is asking them to look at the 5-minute Australian explain pain cartoon. Yeah. So I get them to do that.
Great,
man. Kind of the essence of PPD, that people have emotions that they're not consciously recognizing. So it's not unusual at all for someone to say, I don't have emotions about anything other than my symptom, even though they do. So one way into that is to ask people to make a list of all the stresses in their life, both past and present, or at least the significant stresses in their life, past and present. And because it's almost a certainty that there will be emotions connected with one or more of those sources of stress. And but just having them start writing the list down, it has a way of, again, pulling ideas out of people's heads that they didn't necessarily recognize were there. And once they start writing, one idea leads to another, and they can wind up with quite a significant list. They may also notice that a number of items on the list tend to cluster in certain areas, such as their spouse or their childhood or a parent, for example. It's not unusual for a PPD patient, for example, to have an abuser from their childhood still be in their life today, not necessarily abusing them anymore, but still in their life, a regular presence. And once you've got that list, you can look at that and you can start to draw some conclusions, and you can start to gently inquire about people. Even if they say they don't have emotions about a particular area, that's where you can bring up the question, well, what if your best friend was experiencing this particular stress? Or what if your child was being subjected to this stress that you had when you were a child? How would you feel about that? And that's going to begin to connect people with the idea that yes, they do have emotions. And I always remember one of my patients who said, there is no way that my symptoms can be stress related because everything in my life is going extremely well. And I said, you're probably right, but there is one exception. And the exception is people who were under stress when they were a kid. And all of a sudden she goes, oh, because, she had completely walled off, everything to do with her growing up years from her current day life. She was trying not to think about it. She was trying not to recognize that there might be any connection at all between those years and what was happening to her in the present. But just mentioning that there might still be a long-term impact from that was enough to start her thinking and start her connecting with the emotions. So the emotions are there. It's just a question of helping people to gradually come to realize it. Can be tricky.
I sometimes, when I do free 30-minute calls with every new client I take on, or even before, just decide they might just need a little bit of advice. But as a way of finding out in a 30-minute call, you can't suddenly say, have you had a challenging childhood or whatever. But I would usually say, there are four main reasons, causes of stress, and some can be, challenges in childhood when you feel a bit unsupported, or but it could be, current stress, it can be personality, pace of life, etc. And I just sort of say, do you feel that there's any of those that are more relevant for you? And usually then that's when they will come out, and then they'll start recognizing, well, actually, yes, and they'll mention one or two things which we can then work from. But also if they're just saying, no, and as Dave was saying, it's incredibly common, as we're all seeing, for them to just say, no, I'm not stressed, it's just that the pain, it's the symptoms that I'm stressed with and angry with. Whereas actually then just starting to find out what was going on in their life leading up to the time of the pain, or I even get them journaling to their pain, usually when they're on board with all this, but I do get them actually writing an unsent letter to their pain and then turning the relationship round with it so that they can at least address that superficially and then you start exploring deeper.
Yeah, Georgie mentioned an important point, is asking people if anything stressful happened in their life right before their symptoms began. Because oftentimes you'll see a chronological link there. Another one that I mention routinely in my presentations is people who take care of everybody else in their world, but they have difficulty putting themselves on the list of people they take care of. So if they get 5 or 10 minutes of free time, they start thinking, what useful, constructive thing could they be doing, rather than, taking a break and doing something enjoyable for themselves. And, sooner or later, that kind of lifestyle catches up with people.
And And interestingly, Dave, you know, you've always used this term, and I always have to think about it when I say it, and I've got to think about it again now, is the good partner, bad illness. Is that it?
Oh, the good partner, bad illness syndrome. Yeah, that's
I had one today on the phone who was saying, yeah, but I've been, you know, I was in a really good place. But, you know, this is the best I've been in ages. And he's only 25. He's been unable to work or do anything for the last year. And so I was telling him about that, and then I started explaining about basically the build-up from, and then of course it turns out he was abused in childhood. So
yeah, the contrast, if you were mistreated as a child and you evolve out of that and grow out of that and achieve a certain level of self-esteem in spite of all that, and then when you do that, you're prepared to be in a relationship with somebody that believes in you, who can be equally supportive in the relationship, more of a, you know, a balanced 50-50 kind of relationship. And when people finally achieve that for the first time in their lives, it is such a contrast with what they were accustomed to when they were growing up, that it finally helps them to see that, you know, if this person that I'm in a relationship with believes in me and thinks I'm wonderful, then I probably should not have been so badly mistreated when I was growing up. And that inevitably stirs up a lot of anger and frustration and guilt and fear and shame that can then lead to symptoms. And I've had countless patients over the years that they got started in a new relationship that was really going well, and that's when they became ill. And it seems ironic, but when you understand the connection to the childhood adversity, you can see how it came about.
And Sarah's just saying that her mother-in-law is a total classic. Abusive previous relationship, met Sarah's husband's dad and fell apart, totally rejects SIRPA. And that's the common thing that's going around. In fact, we've been discussing this in our members group. I mean, I've just spent the last few days with my parents. You know, how I might as well just laugh, basically, because, you know, they're fit as fiddles, really, until they moved house. Then their main home they've been in for 40 years. And then the last 2 years, gone downhill dramatically. My father with chronic back pain, heart problems, my mother with this persistent cough, as well as chronic pain, but she's rallied because she's now more of a carer for my dad, and a perpetual cough that she's had for years, off and on. And then I remember going for a meal with my parents, my sister and her husband, and my husband and me. And I remember at the end of the evening saying to my sister, do you realise she didn't cough at all throughout the evening? Whereas if we'd had the dinner at her house, she would have been cough, 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 because she's a people pleaser and likes everything to be right. She now is coughing almost constantly, except one evening when we sat down and we were just relaxing, watching telly, and she wasn't coughing at all. And she was telling me the doctor said it was the medication she'd been put on, and then saying, but weirdly, I've stopped that medication now. It hasn't made a difference. And you know what? Just don't say anything. There's no point saying anything. But I know amongst the group of us, we've got various parents where this is going on, and it can be just so challenging, and we just have to let it go. Any other questions?
I've got another one.
But I can chip in on the question Liz asked. I'll drop my pen now. But what I tend to do is if I have just a good prod around, really. So if someone comes with a symptom, I ask them, like, did it come out of the blue or did it gradually build up? If it come out of the blue, I ask them about the 72 hours before that. And if it's a gradual build up, I ask them when they first noticed it. So if there's, I first noticed it in January, for example, then I'll ask them about the 18 months before that. So I'll ask them about the summer 2016. And that tends to work.
That fits in with the metaphysical anatomy. Certainly in metaphysics, that's what they say. They look at about 18 months before a specific symptom comes on. Yeah,
it's just what I found. It can kind of just help people open up a little bit, you know, and think, oh, actually, yeah, my mum did die somewhere last year, you know, and things like that. Just kind of just helps them build some kind of association up.
Yeah, it's anything.
It's really helpful.
Yeah, it can be really helpful to just start helping them explore, not just look at what was going on in that lead up, but what was going on even in the months before, like you say.
Gives
Yeah,
them a structure.
another area where the timing issues crop up is in somebody who's been through a traumatic event of some kind. And, you know, if the traumatic event was right before the symptoms began, then the connection is pretty obvious. But it's not unusual for the trauma to have happened sometime long before the symptoms began. And then what I look for in these cases is some kind of a triggering event that is in some way linked to the trauma that was the actual initiator of the symptoms.
But Lizzie, I'm assuming that you don't have as long with your patients, clients as we do.
Lizzie is a doctor, Dave, GP.
We've met, yeah. We sat opposite each other in the lunch, I think, the tea.
Right, that's
right. Yeah. No, I don't have very long. So I typically, so if I see someone, so today I had a lady with shoulder pain, and she said, you know, and it clinically sounded like arthritis, and she wanted an X-ray, and I said, well, we can send you for an X-ray. It'll probably it may show arthritis, but the interesting thing, there's something interesting about pain. Would you like to know about it? And I said, sometimes the findings on the X-rays don't really correlate with people's symptoms, and we find that there's often emotional aspects there. And she looked at me and she said, well, you know, I've had an awful year. She said, it's been really emotional. I've had one death after another. And it was like the floodgates opened. And she was my last patient, so we had a bit of a natter. And that's happened before. And then the patients have come back and said that the pain's gone. Just quite fun, really. So the simple answer is, if it's my last patient and you know, I can spend a bit of time with them, and this lady was she's just a very nice lady. It's always easier if they're nicer. I shouldn't say that, but although I try and treat everyone the same, but yeah, I tend to introduce the concepts from the moment go, but I'm always very careful that there may be something physical going on. And the last thing you want to do is to kind of say, or for the patient to get the impression that you're saying that it's emotional and you find something physical, because then they get obviously very angry. So understandably. So that's kind of how I work. And if I sense they're not going to take it on board.
I'm just thinking that, you know, in terms of practical, it's very easy to be able to ask lots of questions around it. But if you are in a GP, if you're in a busy surgery and you can't dig around enough for them to open up and then go, oh, okay, yeah, or enough people sort of say, oh yeah, but that's fine. Oh yeah, that happened in the past, but I'm fine. I'm over that, or whatever. So that's one of the reasons why I give them the website and just say, look, you know, just think about it, and because there's enough on there to actually for them to do a bit of thinking.
It's very true, actually. And
what is an EPC surgery?
What was
Sorry?
that?
What is an EPC surgery?
A general practitioner, doctor's surgery.
Okay. So a family doctor. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm quite lucky because I get 45 minutes as an advanced practitioner, but even that's not long enough really to clear to do the physical examination to rule out anything physical. So I find you just have to sow the seeds in those patients who, there are some that are really receptive to it and you can give them lots of information, but I find with others it's just a question of sowing those first seeds so that they hopefully go on and investigate further. There's a limit, isn't there, to what you can do. It's great in private practice because you can spend as long as you want with them, but when you're only seeing them for a one-off session, it's quite difficult.
I think there are people in different areas here, and also some, you know, like myself, nearly 100% of my work is this field, and therefore people come to me for it. But for many people, and certainly me to begin with, I was seeing many people who were just coming to me as a physio, and therefore, and even now, occasionally I will get some people locally. And then it is, like you say, Kate, it's about sowing seeds, and it says it might well just be doing a normal assessment initially, and then just sowing seeds or point out the anomalies, and then integrate that with whatever you're doing, your professional work is, and then gradually moving them down the line towards this work if they're ready for it, and if they keep coming back to you. And then you can go into it fully. But initially it's just, and like Lizzie was saying, you know, for many people, they will just, those initial ones are ones where they just get it like that, and they're the ones that maybe would read the book and get better. And those are great to have some of those as well as the ones that take a lot longer and a lot more support. Any final questions for Dave? Maybe one more question. Yes, Sarah's got one. Oh, right, okay. Sarah's interested in depression, are you? Dave, you mentioned in the book you sometimes prescribe antidepressants. US non-medics can't do that. Oh, us non-medics can't do that. What do you think about psychotherapeutic work around relationships as cause for depression? E.G. William Glasser.
Well, the research on treatment of depression suggests that medication and psychotherapy are roughly equally effective. The combination of the two may be better than either one alone. There's been some challenges recently to the research on medication for depression, indicating that there may be some hidden biases in the outcomes of some of those trials that shouldn't have been there, and that maybe the medications are really not as effective as we've been led to believe. But I think absolutely, especially for patients that are reluctant to take medication, you can help people a great deal by counseling, by identifying what their psychosocial issues are, both past and present, identifying if they have good self-care skills, or if they're the kind of people that, like I said before, are taking care of everybody else in the world and not themselves. You can have a substantial impact on depression through addressing all of those things, and some of the long-term consequences of adversity in childhood, which include all the things that Sarno talks about, trying to be perfect, trying to be good, trying to be compassionate, trying to be helpful to everybody. Those kinds of qualities grow that are so typically associated with PPD. They grow directly from a child's attempts to cope with adversity in childhood, and helping people understand those connections can help them get past that and become more of the person they were meant to be, and more of the person they would have become if they had not had to suffer. So all of those are very fruitful areas for psychotherapeutic counseling that can alleviate depression without any medication at all. And I'm sorry, you mentioned also relationships. The people who are in toxic relationships, it's typically because that's what they grew up with, and that is they're accustomed to being with people to whom they must give a great deal of support. And they've always been in that kind of home situation. So when they form relationships as an adult, it is not surprising that they end up with people that need a great deal from them. And so they end up in relationships that are 95% giving and only 5% getting back. This is the source of becoming a codependent person, a person who sacrifices their own needs for the needs of their partner. It's because they've been doing it their whole lives. And if we can show them that this is learned behavior, and that they learned it from their early environment, and that their early environment was toxic, and that they should not have learned that they have learned things that are basically not true, then they can help eliminate those behaviors, change what they've learned, and recognize that they deserve to be treated as well as anybody else. It's a big shift. It's a 180-degree flip in their self-image that we're trying to engineer for a lot of these patients. But that's, once they get there, it's a absolutely essential foundation for all the recovery steps to come after that.
Yep.
One of the other ideas I try to convey to people is the definition of a hero in our society. And some of my mental health colleagues think this is a little hokey, but it works for me, which is that, a hero in our society is somebody who has overcome a difficult physical or mental challenge for a good cause. And somebody who's a childhood stress survivor has done exactly that. And they've done it when they were a kid, and they've done it when they didn't have any other support around them. They've done it when they didn't have any particular training for how to help them survive and cope with those experiences. So in my mind, they absolutely have done a heroic thing. Another analogy I use is somebody who was born on the far side of Mount Everest and has climbed up and over to get to be an adult. That emphasizes they deserve no responsibility for the place they found themselves in when they were born, but they deserve every bit of credit for having climbed that mountain to get out of that situation. And once they start thinking of themselves in these terms, not as second-rate human beings, but as heroic human beings, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I definitely started using that, Dave, when you first told me that however many years ago, and it's something we teach on the course as well, and I think it's very relevant. We may not give them stickers saying I'm a hero, but I definitely talk to them, and when you often will get a real emotional response when you start talking to them and like that, and it just can cause a real shift for them, isn't it, in how they see themselves. Right, well, thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate it. I know we all will. And we're recording this so that the others can listen to it as well when they want to, and they can listen back. But I really appreciate you giving us your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming in on a late evening and attending this. It's always great to communicate with people in Europe who are doing this work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, thanks very much. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
And thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.